There's two tea bags in here because one is not enough when you're a G. Hello and welcome to Threadings, the newsletter and podcast that has now become a video essay because you all asked me to. I have an essay for you entitled On Targeted Deportations, They Hunt in Broad Daylight. This first image is from street cam footage. It was obtained by AP News. You can see a figure, a woman in a white coat and a hijab being walked towards an unmarked black SUV by two figures, one on either side holding either arm, and three more that walk about the person being detained. She's handcuffed. We begin with a journal entry from a few days ago entitled Everything is Upside Down. I did not know what it would be like to watch, to witness people that feel like my own growing flesh vanish in the night, in the afternoon, in the broad and bold daylight. I remember when my grandmother came out of the basement. I felt like I hadn't seen her since when we picked her up at the airport, seen her in the light. And those days of bright white gap tooth grins and African safari calling cards. She came from the war and went promptly into my mother's basement, into a different kind of hiding. The day she came out, up into the light, in the golden Colorado afternoon, I began to associate hope with the brilliance of the bold sun. She had her papers. Finally, my grandmother became a United States citizen, and so she was no longer in the basement, and so there was no more need to hide. And so we all laughed in the light. The history I have read says they come when we are sleeping. And that was true for Suri when he was taken from his 3 kids and his wife. It was a Monday night. Yet they kidnapped Khalil in broad daylight. They took Ozturk off the sidewalk on a Boston spring afternoon. And now they hunt for my friend Tal. And everyone knows. And they hunt in the light now. I know that it is foolish. The remnants of leftover hope from a 7-turned-9-year-old who waited years to see her grandmother in the light. But I thought, I had hoped that the papers in the light denoted some safety, I suppose. Foolish, I know, it's just that. It is just that he's my friend. His thoughts shape my own. He does not know me, but his disappearance would feel akin to my grandmother without the gap in her teeth, to the world without the afternoon. Everything askew, uncanny, upside down. Nothing is right. I was told they come for us in the night, but this is where I feel frightened, where I did not before. Now they hunt in broad daylight. Introductions from the Ithaca Voice. It was written on Tal's targeted deportation. It says the notice that Tao's visa has been revoked was sent nearly 20 hours after he received the initial invitation, in quotes, to surrender himself to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. I wrote the above entry on a shared journaling session that I had with a handful of internet strangers and some internet friends. I enjoy lives that exist in liminal space. Like if you catch it, you catch it. You know, horrid for my existence as a so-called influencer, phenomenal for my existence as a corporal feeling being. The above entry fell out of my pen. I expected to write about my usuals, right? Mortality, contending with the death of loved ones, incarceration, fear of success. We played modern African jazz music and journaled to ourselves for a few minutes, and I did not realize how frightened I have been. Watching non-violent advocates for Palestine be hunted one by one. until I slowed down to consider the shape of my fear. Absent is the grief of stratified violation, where I am enraged and upset and abhorred by violence against people I shaped myself to love. We in the States, especially those of us that grew up here, are not naturally oriented towards those in the colonized world. You have to make yourself like that. The colonized world is that world that is always considered up for grabs by our superpower government. And that is by design. Of course, it is easier to commit atrocities against people who are not quite but almost as human as us. So that anger that you have to shape yourself into when those people are violated, that anger takes training and maintenance. And when it is honed well, it causes disillusionment and dissolution from the mission of the United States. I am not feeling stratified anger about this. The fear that I feel is quite personal. It sounds like, I wonder how long I can go before my mother gets a knock on her door. I wonder how long it will take to call my citizenship into question. Remember redacted? Because I do still fear for this person's safety, so I cannot say this sentiment on the internet. What happens now that they hunt in broad daylight? Section 1. Who is in a nation? I received this comment on an Instagram post where I was discussing the next phase of fascism in the United States. It is from user SVK_1040, and it says, getting social programs is against fascism and National Socialism. These two types of government were built on centering national welfare as opposed to the US, who was the policeman of the world. You can criticize, but be accurate. What we have in the United States is late stage capitalism and using a country as an economic zone and nothing more. This comment came as a critique of me calling the United States a fascist project, expanding the agenda of the foundations it was built upon. I completely agree with the assessment that fascist governments center welfare. I also agree with the argument that the United States is using a country as an economic zone, or even multiple countries as economic zones. I disagree that fascism is somehow inherently incompatible with late-stage capitalism or worldwide militaristic imperialism. So let's define some terms so that we can all orient to what I am discussing here. Fascism, noun. A system of government that exalts the race and nation above the individual and places authority of the nation with one dictatorial leader and an autocracy where an absolute power is held by the central government. Characteristics include extreme militarism, movement away from direct electoral democracy, swift and forceful and often violent suppression of dissent, and forced reorder within economic and social exchange. Fascism does absolutely work to extract the nation above the individual and protect the nation at every cost, including the rest of the world's well-being and homeostasis. In writing this, I'm wondering aloud, who is the nation within the US project? And who is here to provide cheap labor to uphold said nation? Who is here to enjoy the nation's supremacy? And who is simply here to enforce the rules of the nation and support an expansion without ever becoming a beneficiary? Then, speaking of militaristic expansion, we have imperialism, noun. The maintenance of extended political, social, or economic power of one nation over other nation states, often by direct acquisition and annexing of land. However, you can also use cultural and or soft power. Imperialism is a policy, it is a political position of advocacy, and it is an action all at once. So then, are fascism and imperialism truly opposed? Do they not often go hand in hand? Late stage capitalism, noun. Colloquially, this is used to describe the phase of capitalism that began after the Industrial Revolution and the globalization of the economy in the 21st century. The phrase itself was coined by Werner Sombart, a German historical economist, after the deprivation scene worldwide, or, imperialist worldwide, after World War I. However, the existence of late-stage capitalism has been referred to as early as Karl Marx's final publication in his 3-part volume, Capital, A Critique of Political Economy, published in 1894, characterized by multinational companies, wealth concentration in the hands of the few, and routine economic disasters. Here's an excerpt from Professor Richard Wolff on the Socialist Program that I think explains this a bit better than I can.
Everything that is done by whether it's President Biden or it would have been President Harris or now it is President Trump. Everything they can do as politicians is limited and constrained by the ups and downs of the economic system they preside over. In their enthusiasm and in their partisanship, they blame each other for almost everything. Mr. Trump this week or last week famously blamed Mr. The former president, I'm trying to be nice here, for the egg prices. You know, there's no limit to all of this kind of craziness. But here's the reality. Capitalism is a system that has been unstable from its beginning in the 17th century. Wherever capitalism has settled in as the dominant economic system across the globe, in the United States, everywhere, it has brought with it what is politely called the business cycle, what is less politely called recessions, inflations, upturns, downturns, crises, crashes. I could go on. Our vocabulary is very rich because we cannot shake this disease. And that's what it is. It's a disease of capitalism.
I do not believe that any of the above are mutually exclusive. Rather, I believe that the interrelated nature of capitalism, fascism, and imperialism describes the foundation of the United States, which took a sovereign land and converted it into private property meant to benefit wealthy, white, land-owning men who were eager to exterminate and enslave people in order to secure cheap labor for their capitalistic world design and expand their access to natural resources that they often have to steal, thus becoming the police force of the world, as this commenter refers to. However, I do want the record to show that I mean police, less in the marketing, protect and serve way, and more of the, actually the Supreme Court said we don't got to do all that way, but we will fuck you up over some private property way. The whole world boils down to labor and land. We manage our constituents the best that we can. I do agree that the fascist nation state invests time, energy, and resources towards maintaining the integrity of the state's benefits for its selected beneficiaries. The reason I feel the need to point out the different face of fascism is not because fascism is new. It is not new. The US has always been a fascist project. Always, from its inception. I point out the fascism as it takes on a new face because the beneficiaries of the nation are changing quite rapidly. Global liberalism. There was once a time where nation states needed to appear moral. That's where we get the language of human rights. Now, as a side note, I have often said, why are there people who decide who is human and what rights are and what rights can be given and taken away depending on whether you have a nation state there to protect you? But I digress. A nation state assumes responsibility for bestowing rights unto all its citizens, which function as, allegedly, universal safeties that they can guarantee to protect for their civilian populace. A moral nation would also allow for upward mobility, right? That's what capitalism is supposed to be. It's supposed to be free. Freedom to move up the ladder. Even if one came from the humblest of circumstances, the protection of rights would guarantee some safety if you fell down. And the opportunity for advancement would allow for that desire, that soft power, the idolization and the idealization of a nation, the pride in being part of a nation greater than them, a love for the hand that giveth and taketh away. We're in a conundrum. How does an overextended empire with a growing internal population of racially marginalized people protect everyone? What happens when key stakeholders want protections for their assets, which are at odds with the protection of the labor force? What happens when the imperialistic projects are wildly unpopular with the majority of its citizenry? A roll of the dice. The nation state contracts, it prioritizes, it makes budget cuts. This time it was to the local farmers that grow the food for kids in school and food banks. Papers that once protected people are now meaningless. Why was a green card holder stripped naked for interrogation and detained without access to his medicine for going through an airport? They had taken him to the hospital. His family is working with the German consulate on his release. Court orders that once protected people are now meaningless. Why was Dr. Rasha Alawi, 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 Alawi? I should look it up.
Alwiya.
Yeah, Alwiya.
Alwiya.
Why was Dr. Rasha Alwiya, Lebanese kidney specialist and assistant professor at Brown University, deported before her hearing? Despite the fact that U.S. District Judge Leo Sorokin demanded her right to a trial for expressing support for not the political but the spiritual teachings of Hezbollah leader and Lebanese giant Hassan Nasrallah. These are not citizens anyways, right? That's what we're supposed to say, right? In practical terms, I am only as safe as those on the outside of the margins, not just out of the interconnectedness of everything or in the metaphorical sense of being on the same body, the same breathing ecosystems, in the very literal imperialistic sense that the borders on the nation are closing. Under white supremacist imaginations, I was never supposed to hold citizenship. Trump has issued via executive order a call to end birthright citizenship. The game shifts. Someone yells Yahtzee. Our world moves accordingly. If the contradiction of the nation jolts you into feeling fear, good. At least you are feeling. If the kidnapping of people who have done everything right, quote unquote, immigrated to the country in previously approved of fashions, have papers and attorneys and visas in order, were tied to respectable academic institutions, if their handcuffing and abduction into unmarked cars in the broad and bold daylight strikes fear in you, good. That means you recognize yourself in them. You are fearful because something in your body understands intrinsically that any distance between them and you is fabricated, falsified by an illegitimate government on stolen land. Conclusions. I oftentimes forget that I am considered radical. I don't consider myself particularly radical. I consider myself someone who spends a lot of time drawing parallels. I like to connect dots. I like making constellations out of our many points of fear because it equips me to tell stories which allow me to be bold, even when boldness is neither comforting nor reassuring. As we talked about our fears on this Liminal Space Live, one of the participants, called 929, etc., said that all of their fears were selfish. I am here to commiserate. Selfish. My fears are selfish too. As the nation state contracts, my person expands. I feel like one big congealed Frankensteinian monster. I feel the jailing of Momodutal would disorient me from my daily reality. I think of him often throughout my day. I bought fish for iftar this morning at the time of writing. I'm like, can he still go to iftar parties? Because that's how Ozturk was taken. Does he have bodyguards? Would it matter? Would it help if a gaggle of brothers were all handcuffed and forcibly walked to black SUVs by plainclothes so-called officers? I pressed my dress for Sunday. Will he go out to celebrate Eid? Is it safe? Does it matter anymore? Isn't this the point, right? To disrupt the illusion of safety, to make it so that you are afraid night and day of capture, that you become imprisoned anyhow? How far does it go? How far do the rings of terrorist supporter travel? I am in digital ink signing my name where my loyalties lie and have been. My fears are as selfish as yours. I'm not fearful in any esoteric sense. I'm fearful in the way that I wash my hair and think, what if Dal is captured today? I have to travel to see my mom for her surgery. What is the day where I'm fearful that my US passport is seized at the border? What is the day where someone racially profiles me because of the way that I wrap my head and because of my name? How long until I'm shown my social media posts in a court, before the court? I don't even get to the court. I'm sitting in an interrogation room adjacent to some room, a hole with bars for doors, and I'm told I'm being tried for treason. All these things felt silly, right? I want to believe that I'm being silly. All of these things, these actions that felt intangible and inconsequential, nonviolent protests, what do these words do, etc. All of them are now realizing real material consequences. I want to believe that I'm being dramatic. I would love nothing more than to believe that I'm being dramatic. This time, I connect the dots in the shape of an orange tree. And they're in bloom, the orange trees. Mango season fast approaches. I draw bravery in this way. I am, among many things, a writer. I was born to bear fruit. However frightened I am, I was born to bear fruit. I end with a postscript. At the time of writing, Ramadan was concluding and Momodu Tal was still at least to public knowledge in the United States. At the time of publishing, which is April 5th, 2025, Tal has fled the US. I'm reminded of my Auntie Dequi's refrain when discussing the plight of political prisoners, where she would remind me not to forget those who were exiled. Exile is death, she would say. Well, I am always in the habit of speaking libations over our dead. Materially, socially, ontologically, corporally. I wish you safe passage and easy return, Tal. Glory to the axis of resistance. Glory to the martyrs. Glory to the new class of political prisoners and political exiles. Glory to the God of the oppressed, the one at the lynching tree and the one under the rubble. I no longer ask for salvation. I ask for steadfast strength. I want to hold this world in my hands. Me. In the meantime, may every battle, naval, legal, intellectual, every battle for survival be moved in our favor from the steadfastness of our beliefs and from the work that we do to bring those beliefs into fruition. I hope the work of your day passes through your hands with ease. Peace.